We camped at a Baba Kibris. I had a place there. It's a Hohokam site where there's petroglyphs all over the place. It's a wonderful place. And I remember going out there on the east side of the Baba Kibris there. It's now pretty much a migrant route, and it's not as pleasant a place as it used to be. But Jim was worried because we went out there with, I forget if we had 3 or 4 bottles of Bordeaux, and it looked like we were going to run out. And he wondered if I could go back to Three Forks, a place where the Indians bought their liquor, you know, and you know, you don't exactly have Bordeaux in such a place. Anyway, we got through the night. It was all right. Okay. I took him down to the Seri coast of Sonora, Mexico. And the place, you know, Jim and I went through the border, and I can remember, you know, in all the checkpoints, you know, like the Border Patrol, you know, they want to know, you know, they're checking you out, and I always look a little suspicious, and I'm a little, you know, naturally paranoid, and I have, you know, the cornered ferret aspect to my charming personality sneaks out during border checks. And, you know, so Jim was all, and they said, "Where are you from?" Jim and his accent, "Michigan." And that was it. They just waved us through. It was the easiest trip I ever had down there. Anyway, we were down there, and we're in a great place. It's south of Caborca, which is a dope town now, but back in those days, it's also a place where it's the only place in the North American continent where ancient Pleistocene hunters, the Clovis people, hunted a Gompa there. And that is like a elephant-like thing with actually four horns kind of coming out of it. And we didn't know it was there then, but that's where we camped, and it was just an empty land where we could stand up on a mesa and see the ocean out there. And it's a series of cliffs going down, and you start down the cliffs, and you see piles of snail shells, and that's where, you know, the prehistoric Indians trekked inland with a pile of snail shells and had a little sushi on one of those ledges. So anyway, Jim and I are out there, and I actually got a huge backpack on Jim on this wild mesa overlooking the Sea of Cortez. The only time in my knowledge he ever put one on. I had to hook the waist strap under his considerable belly because he couldn't see it, you know. And his pack was so heavy with beer and a big bottle of tequila, we had to board our hike. We had to come back, and I remember we had to camp close to the truck, and there was a desert tortoise shell there. We called it Turtle Camp. So more camping stories. In the Boot Hill of New Mexico, up in the empty Animas Mountains, we perhaps set a world record for cold cooking puñasco over an oak fire. I wore fingerless gloves chopping the garlic while the olive oil congealed on the outside of the frying pan. We sat around the blazing fire digesting Italian sausage we overate almost every time we cooked in the woods. And we spent the night watching tiny elf owls. It was like probably April because it's the mating season for these little elf owls. And Jim and I were just there. We just had a sloth and bloat, and we were enjoying an Armagnac after a big meal. And all of a sudden, we looked up, and there's all these fucking 20 or 30 elf owls looking at us, you know, and they'd flip from one perch to the other, you know, and you know they vocalized during that time, which is their mating season, and it was magic, you know, us in the middle of this place where there's rumored to be a jaguar and the last Mexican wolves north of the border. Okay. A few years later, Jim called from Michigan and asked me to meet him in Salt Lake City. He was field testing a new SUV for car and driver. Yeah, I know. The magazine wanted a Harrison story. You know, I've never knew Jim to ever look under the hood of a vehicle anymore. You know, they weren't talking about being a gearhead there. But anyway, you know, we beat the hell out of this thing. I was quite impressed, actually, and saw some great country. We drove into the slick rock country of southeast Utah and climbed down into a canyon where we visited a panel of ancient petroglyphs carved in the rock. In the dark patina, a pair of cranes danced between a set of life-size wolf tracks, the Wolfman petroglyph outside of Bluff. Here was the shaman's lair. Jim, with his bottomless curiosity, just sat there, taking it in. That's why I love taking him to those places, you know. he knew the moment. We didn't talk all the time. And he could be beautifully quiet. And anyway, and later, we camped out on a precipitous finger of rock that jutted out in the Canyonlands National Park. It was one of Edward Abbey's 2 favorite camping sites, the other place being, the Cabeza Prieta place. And it fell off vertically for hundreds of feet in all directions. It's a finger north of Cathedral Rock. It goes off towards Lavender Canyon and Salt Canyon. Jim's acrophobia kicked in when I lay my sleeping bag down next to the rim. He was not comfortable, The next morning, we returned to the valley floor, a necessary compromise. Jim Harrison was one of the most generous men I ever knew. He lent countless thousands to dozens of less fortunate friends who needed help. He seldom, if ever, got paid back, and that didn't stop him. Jim would invent jobs for me when he knew or thought I was broke. He lent money to my ex-wife that I never knew about. When traveling, he kept his single good eye out for a paucity of tip, the dangerous baldness of tires, or the looming mortgage payment. He took care of working writers like Chuck Bowden and Jack Turner. That generosity extended to sharing his time with younger and beginning writers who he encouraged and sometimes mentored throughout his life. At my wife Andrea's bookstore, Elk River Books in Livingston, Montana, Jim was always up for signing books by the boxload. One night in 2001, when Jim was sicker than shit and Linda was in the hospital with a coma, he crawled up on a stage at a benefit and read with Peter Matheson, Living Montana's greatest literary night. Of course, I knew his books. My friend William Eastlake gave me a galley proof of Jim's first novel, Wolf, which Bill had blurred. Years later, Jim berated me for leaving that galley in a geodesic dome of a hippie college friend who lived deep in the woods of Ontario. Do you know how much that thing cost? Jim said, do you know how much that thing is worth? There we go. After I read his first 2 novels, nothing he wrote surprised me, except perhaps the speed and ease with which he churned out Legends of the Fall. It was just a matter of time. When Jim began working on Dalva, he hired me to do research. He paid me, and I wrote up my field notes from the months that I'd spent exploring the wild region of Baja's southern Gulf Coast, which Jim embedded verbatim in a novel. It's like 4 or 5 pages of Dalva. And Dalva remains my favorite book. Many decades later, our houses are by chance 10 miles apart in the same Montana valley. Sometimes I take my dog River over there to play with Harrison's dog Folly. The last time I went to his house was last fall, when his wife of 55 years, Linda King Harrison, died. In early February this year, Andrea and I picked up some white menudo at the Little Mexico restaurant in Tucson and made the drive to Patagonia, careful to pull into Jim's driveway at 3:30 sharp. A punctuality we always observed but never talked about. He was working as hard as I'd ever seen him, taking naps between bouts of writing. It's the only thing I know how to do, he kept saying. Jim was shirtless, still suffering from the lingering neuralgia of shingles, and his pants were falling off the crack of his ass. I want my wife back, but can't have her, he'd say. Jim still had his dog. The housekeeper would come over and feed him, and he still went to the Wagon Wheel Bar in the afternoon for drinks. But it was lonely out there. I can't emphasize that enough. It was really lonely those last months. The day they found Jim dead, our friend Phil Caputo was called over to say goodbye before the medics moved him. Jim was on the floor of his study where he'd fallen from a chair, apparently from a heart attack, Phil wrote. He died a poet's death, Phil wrote that, literally, with a pen in his hand while writing a new poem. I smile as I remember the lightheaded macho shit I gave Harrison after he and Caputo got lost bird hunting east of the head of Sonoyta Creek and spent a freezing night huddled around a cottonwood fire until the Arizona Fish and Game Wardens came and found them the next morning. Doofless boys. Back home, I look out my window at the fresh snow blanketing the valley between the Absaroka Mountains and the foothills of the Gallatin Range, north towards Jim's place. There's a hole in the sky. Thank you. Let me tell one more story that kind of hooks up Abby with Jim a little bit. Oh, I'm talking about my friends. And I'll have more stories later if anybody wants to hear them. I've got a lot. But Jim and Ed and I, Peter, God, I miss these guys. You know, when in Ed and Peter's case, they're about 15 years older than me, and you know, there's an edge of the patriarchy to a lot of male friendships. But at the end, I was there. I was there for Ed. You know, I was there the last days of his life. I was there alone with him the last night when he died. And I took him out and I buried him. And I just thought I'd just read this, a story I told to Jim Harrison. This is about Ed. This is from, I think this is in the book Walking It Off, I'm not sure. The last time Ed Abbey smiled was when I told him where he was going to be buried. And I smile too when I think of this last small favor, this last simple task friends can do for one another. The rudimentary shovel work, this sweaty labor consummating trust, finally testing the exact confirmation by lying down in the freshly dug grave to check out the view. Bronze patina, a boulder beyond Limapala Valley, and turquoise sky beyond branch of Trodi. Then receiving the sky. I had to lie down in the grave just to make sure it was all right, and it was. And so I'm lying down in the grave, and 7 buzzards soaring above the grave, joined by 3 others, all 10 banking over the volcanic rubble and riding the thermal up the flank of the mountain, gliding out over the distant valley. Even years later, I grin as I crest the ridge above his grave. The earth falls away, and mountain ranges stretch off into the great distance as far as the eye can see. There is not a human sign or sound, only the faint desert breeze stirring the blossoms of brittlebush. We should be so lucky. On the eve of March 16th, I journeyed to the edge of this desert place. March 16th is a day of the dead for me. The anniversary of the My Lai massacre, and also the day in 1989, 3 friends and myself buried Ed Abbey here. Illegally, of course, in accordance with his last wishes. I was ordered out of the field in Vietnam after the Tet Offensive, and it was March 16th. And the helicopters that picked me up, flew out to the coast, went north. We got shot at, no big deal, you get shot at all the time in helicopters. I looked down, I knew the place, it was My Lai. And of course, I didn't know till a year later when I saw those pictures in Life magazine what had gone down there. And that changed my life. You know, Doug Peacock was really shut with heaven because of that. And you know, I was over there on Veterans Day in 2011. I was the only American, only person in My Lai. Those things happen, and you owe them for reasons you don't fully ever understand. Anyway, I had traveled out here alone to Ed's grave. And you know, the need for ceremony comes into my life. Our culture doesn't provide a lot of ceremony. And, you know, and I maintain buffalo and circles of buffalo skulls in the wilderness of Yellowstone, and bear skulls and cairns for my dead, and you know, and sites like the one I have for Ed Abbey's grave. I had traveled out here alone to Ed's grave, and you make up your ceremonies when your culture doesn't help you. We need them. You know, other cultures have healing ceremonies for warriors who return, you know, for